security dimensions of the July the 5th coup attempt. So one of the difficulties we face in Turkey is to explain this event to our international counterparts. It's really very complicated and difficult to express, and one of the difficulties and one of the mysteries of this event is also how Turkey tackles fighting against three terrorist organizations in the aftermath of such a coup attempt, and also how Turkey is dealing with foreign policy challenges in this new era. Of course, both processes are very difficult, and we have to go back the background to understand these. So we will have 4 distinguished guests today. We will try to understand what happened in terms of foreign policy and security issues in the aftermath of July the 15th coup attempt, and also some backgrounds about these developments. So we will have 4 speakers. Ambassador James Jeffrey, who is the Philip Solondz Distinguished Fellow at Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Our second speaker will be Professor Nursin Guney from Yildiz Technical University. She is an expert on Turkish security and foreign policy. Our third speaker is Colonel Richard Outzen, who is a senior U.S. Army advisor and member of policy planning staff at U.S. Department of State. And our fourth speaker is Murat Yesiltas, who is the chair of security studies at SETA Foundation and professor of international relations at Sakarya University. So, Mr. Ambassador, please.
Sure. Let me tackle this from 2 standpoints. One is the situation related to the coup and how that impacted bilateral relations. Secondly, the much broader context of American-Turkish bilateral relations in the context of the Middle East and Eurasia. Turkey, of course, was extremely fortunate to have survived a coup of this breadth and depth and danger. The United States, as many Turks have pointed out, was expected to immediately embrace a democratically elected government facing a military coup, and there was great disappointment. I was involved peripherally outside of the administration in the decisions in the first few hours, and I can assure you this was not a deliberate action by the administration. Rather, any of you who have followed President Obama in the press, or as I have worked with him, know that he doesn't make decisions quickly. He likes to have all of the facts. And there was an effort to gather facts from many of us outside of government and in government to find out what was going on. That led to the delay, and that was very unfortunate because in circumstances like that, you have to act immediately, and we didn't. So that's the first blow. The second blow was in some of the military commanders whose focus is entirely on ISIS. I want to underline that because to understand the foreign policy context of where we're going to be when there's no more ISIS, the American military is finally going to no longer have the war it's wanted for 20 years. I think that's fair, one that it can win and everything else. And it was focused on it, it was doing well. Suddenly, this was perturbation. Incirlik was closed down, interlocutors couldn't be talked with. So these generals just blurted out the first thing that came to their mind. What's going on? Why is it a shame? And of course, as you know, the generals who run the war in Syria and Iraq are not the generals who report to our European command and worry about and work with and cooperate with Turkey. So there were some problems there. But the far bigger problem, of course, is the embarrassing fact that Fethullah Gulen is sitting here in the United States. And Turkey has, in accordance with a extradition treaty dating back to the early 1980s, has asked for his extradition, and the administration has yet to really give a response that understandably Turkey would find acceptable. That's going to continue for some time because of the nature of the court system in America, which not only Turks but Donald Trump has discovered are very, very independent, and they're slow to take decisions. Nonetheless, and here Ankara has a point, the administration could do more to rein in this organization, the allegedly charitable, educational actions of an organization which at best is opaque and at worst, as many correctly believe, I think, was behind this coup. Now, the only good news out of this thing a year later is there is, as far as I can see, no reputable media, think tank, academic, or other actor who's appeared to challenge the idea that this coup was, as you heard this morning from two of your speakers, mainly or largely done by the Gulenists. People have questioned what came after, and that will continue, but there hasn't been any major challenge to that. To the contrary, many independent journalists, Americans as well as Turkish and others, have come to the conclusion that the Gulenists were behind it. So that argument is not in play between our two governments. What remains in play on the bilateral level is, first of all, Turkish suspicions that began on the evening of July 15th and have continued. The very difficult problem of extraditing Fethullah Gulen, and largely concern in Washington that the Turkish government has gone too far in dismissing people from government jobs or prosecuting them because of one or another tie or alleged tie to the Gulenist movement. This is tied up with the overall discomfort of many in America with where Turkey is going politically. Not economically, not in terms of security or diplomacy, but politically. Again, that's not at the center of American concerns, at least of administration concerns. It plays a big role in the media, it plays a big role in Congress, and it's something that both sides will have to watch. In terms of the broader issue of foreign policy, the basic issue is that the global system that both America and Turkey have participated in and very much benefited from is under threat. In the Middle East, it's under threat by Iran, to some degree, the Sunni radical extremist groups, and now Russia joining Iran. And in Europe, it's under threat by Russia. This is something that both the United States and Turkey are aware of. President Erdogan has spoken repeatedly of a Persian expansionism that needs to be dealt with. That's a different approach than, for example, the Saudis take, where it is seen much more in apocalyptic religious terms, but in Erdogan's perception, it appears to be more of a geostrategic challenge. And Turkey has taken certain steps to buttress itself against this. This is an area of considerable cooperation and coordination between the two countries. I'm pretty optimistic about that. The key issue will be Syria after ISIS is defeated, which could be, and when I say ISIS is defeated, I mean as a state and an army, not as an idea or as a terrorist group, but as a state and an army. It will be defeated in the weeks ahead. So the question is, what do we do with Syria and what do we do with Iraq afterwards? There is a general problem of chaos, particularly in Syria. There's the problem of Iran and its surrogates, from Hezbollah to Iraqi militias operating in this region, of great concern to many of us. And for Turkey, there is the problem of the YPG and the PYD, the political and the military and political wings of the Syrian, basically, wing of the PKK. Essentially, people in America know this, but because this is our primary ally against ISIS, and ISIS remains the priority right now, the United States is going to continue to work with the YPG, the PYD, in the guise of the Syrian Democratic Forces, but we know who provides most of the fighting power, and particularly the leadership of that, which is the YPG, the Kurdish military. That problem is going to remain for some time. What will change it, however, at least on the margins, is, first of all, after ISIS is finished, the United States and Turkey are going to be sitting, and to some degree with this new agreement, Jordan and Israel as silent partners are going to be sitting on a considerable amount of Syrian territory. that have been well defended against anybody who's tried to push into it, working with local forces who, however disorganized and whoever at each other's throats, none of whom want to go back under President Assad and the Syrian regime, in an environment where the whole region is concerned about Iran building on the defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria to expand its hold over the northern Middle East. That will be the big question. I would like to say this is where the United States is going to be. I don't know where Turkey is, but there'll have to be some kind of coordination. All I can say is nobody knows yet where the United States quite is on this, because this is a hard, difficult problem. We've tackled Iran before. We were successful in the Iraq-Iran war of pushing it back when it swept into Iraq in 1983. We were successful in the Tanker war. We weren't successful in Beirut. We weren't successful in a political military campaign in 2011 to stay on in Iraq. So our own success with Iran is mixed. This will be the key geopolitical issue that we will have with Turkey. It will be affected by domestic results, domestic situation in Turkey to the extent it would get worse, more turmoil. It will be affected by the Gulen situation, and it will be affected by the YPG question. But the big issue once ISIS is done is what do we do in Iraq and Syria with the Iranian threat and the total disorganization of that region? Thank you. I'll leave you to fix that mess, okay?
All right. Thanks a lot, Mr. Ambassador. I will ask the question after the panel, but I have a simple question. So most people, ordinary people in Turkey somehow believes that U.S. have some involvement behind or some actors within the U.S. have some involvement, in July the 15th failed coup. So what should the U.S. have done differently in order to overcome this conviction among the Turkish public? What could have been done better? So since you have been the ambassador.
There is a belief in Turkey which has a very realpolitik, great powers versus the rest worldview. It's taught in the schools. It's what I've experienced there. And my worldview is not all that different from that. But it particularly sees that great powers don't like competition. Turkey is competition, so therefore ever since Woodrow Wilson advocated an independent Kurdistan, I've never heard an American, other than those of us who've served in Turkey, who knows that fact. And I've never heard a Turk who doesn't know that fact. So this is there is this general feeling of suspicion that the United States is always trying to clip Turkey's wings, to deny Turkey its rightful place in the sun. Turkey isn't the only country that thinks this way. Putin famously believes the greatest disaster of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And even the Germans, who in many respects have learned from 1933 to 1945, often feel that their historic and natural role is being inhibited by the United States. It's just a normal feeling. And thus you have to try doubly hard to react to it. Again, through no deliberate fault, the Obama administration was a few hours slow and a few adjectives short of an immediate response. Immediate responses are important in diplomacy. Putin got it more right than we did, and that's embarrassing. And so I think that we're just going to have to live with that. It just deepens the suspicion that was there long before this administration and long before President Erdogan.
All right. Thank you very much. So our second speaker is Nursin Guney. She will try to get into the backgrounds of the security situation in Turkey before the July the 15th coup, and some of the major discussion with regard to Turkey's vulnerabilities in that area. So.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend my special thanks to the organizers to make me part of this important event today. Of course, especially after July 15th coup attempt, so many articles were written both in media circles as well as in academics, wondering about what would be the main contours of Turkish foreign policy, the conduct of Turkish foreign policy in the aftermath of July 15th. Of course, this was, as being a domestic disastrous night, of course had enormous effect in determination of the main contours of Turkish policy, but this was not the only one main factor that determined the outcome. We need to look at the geopolitical conditions and the shifts that has realized both in regional arena around Turkey as well as the global polarization that we were witnessing in the last few years at least. And in this regard, we know that so many judgments were made, especially regarding to AK Party's conduct of foreign policy, starting with 2002 onwards. And it was divided into two periods generally, like the first period was 2002 up until roughly 2013, and this was the period that was mostly labeled or described as the foreign policy that was in conduct was by the criticizing fronts, of course, as adventurous. It was identity-based, meaning Islamic values ridden one, and also an expansionist one. And according to this derivation, it was asserted that this mode of action of Ankara in its foreign policy has brought problems both in the region as well as beyond. And the second period, or the second phase of conduct of foreign policy, was also marked with the change of things that has happened both in Turkey domestic-wise as well as in region and beyond. And in the region, it was just right aftermath of Arab Spring, and so the counter-revolutions that led this revolution to return from spring to the winter. This was the main turmoil that brought to the region, where we have seen all these civil wars and fractured situation that came out of this event, especially in the MENA region. But at the same time, we have seen that a new policy was waged in Ankara due to the change in command in domestic governance. And this time, it was thought that this period was judged by the critics again as this time that Turkey has returned back to its previous roots, meaning risk-averse policies, more cautious one, and less ideological one. So, as against to this, we have seen a third one coming up, especially when Turkey, after a period of living a little bit isolation in international field, tried to normalize its relations with Russia and together with Israel. And when this issue was also coincided with Turkey's Euphrates Shield operation, again, the previous judgment has come to its limits. Aftermath of this, again, we have seen that Turkey has been somehow accused of having another axis shift, this time towards Putin, Russia. And so all these kind of judgments that came out of was mostly focused on 2 points. One factor was bringing down the conduct of foreign policy to one person. Characteristics, meaning previously it was the Davutoğlu, and this time this was our president Erdogan. So also it was also associated with identity-based explanation, which is the AK Party's mainstream as Muslim identity. And so as to give my answer, personal one, these were not explainable right answers because what we have witnessed, this also holds true for July 15th failed attempt. period holds true for that period too. What has happened and how the conduct of Turkish policy came out was the result of two main factors. One was the shift and change in geopolitics around Turkey, as well as in a global wise. And that is how beforehand it was the end of the Cold War years that Turkey had accumulated in last 20 decades after math of the Cold War years, the capacity, and it was the end of superpower overlay that gave breath to the regional powers to be active in their regions. This has standed till the end of Arab Spring, and that is how Turkey has conducted the instruments of soft power, basically, as well as a constructivist approach in its conduct of foreign policy. But all these tools have become ineffective. What we were witnessing beyond our borders, especially in the Middle East, the turmoil, the civil wars, the terrorist attacks, and Turkey was bordering more than 900 kilometers with Iraq and Syria, and where she once all of a sudden has become somehow become a threat emanating from this region, the terrorist threats that I'm meaning, and also she had to deal with old plots and coup attempts and terrorist attacks inside by PKK, and we have been hearing the cities in the south being somehow hit by the Katyusha rockets by Daesh or ISIS, and this was the situation, and in the midst of this all complex situation that Turkey was dealing, trying to manage the crisis-ridden region's externalities, the negative effects to it. We have experienced that night, July 15th of Coup, and since then we have very naturally seen that it has already started actually before July 15, that Turkey, due to the change that I have explained to you, both domestic-wise and regional and global-wise, tried to adapt and reset the main contours of its foreign policy. And the derivation that I have got, she has since then decided to apply defensive neorealism or realism, which means Turkey was there to somehow secure its border security, first of all. That was the main thing. And inside and outside coming threats, she was trying to develop, as our Turkish President Erdogan has said, a new strategy, a new security paradigm that was put forward, and that was a preventive security paradigm where Turkey was not there to wait until the threat, the origin of the threat comes to our borders. It was about to react beforehand wherever it arises. This holds true both domestic-wise as well as for outside of our borders. So it is very simplistic. Turkey is there, as the defensive realists say so, to maintain its status in the region. It is not expansionist at all, as they somehow question after Euphrates Shield operation and its insistence to become a part of the operation that was supposed to wage against Mosul in Iraq. She was there to defend itself in a defensive realism way, which is it was going to be a moderate way of acting, and also reversed actions. That means she was there to be interest-based alliances, ad hoc alliances from now on. And of course, she was not denying the soft power tools at hand because we have a list of examples that we can give up. For instance, the refugee deal, the refugees that we hosted nearly counts to 3 million in the 6 years of civil war in Syria, and others, the donors, the donations that have been made by Turkey to the developing countries who are in need of. And also, Turkey has tried to hasten its hand in the soft power politics, especially after July 15 coup, to replace, as it has been mentioned, the this morning session what Gülen's schools and, in educational wise they were trying to do, and that is how this educational union came into fore. And we have also bring out other examples. What I'm saying is that she's trying to also be influential not only in cultural and business wise, also tries to be effective as long as it can in educational wise in abroad, that I can say. How many minutes do I have? Just about to finish. Maybe I will stop here and let my colleague to follow up. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Guney, I have a short question. So, grand strategists usually underestimate the role of domestic politics in major strategy decisions. So, do you think the July the 15th coup attempt had a strong or influential role in Turkey's change of grand strategy, especially with regard to relations with Russia or US, or is it just the normal course of events and this just accelerated the process? What do you think?
Well, actually, it depends on our allies. As well. Turkey as living in a geopolitical situation, neighboring with a strong country, not a superpower maybe of yesterday, but Russia, who has a veto power at UN, General Security Council, as well as a nuclear power. And regarding the situation of Turkey having dependent on, importing energy mostly from Russia, is a factor, and the trade-wise volumes of relations between the two. I mean, Turkey as being, there is no change in its map of Western orientation at all. So that is there too. But the July 15th coup has somehow brought a little uneasiness, especially on the behalf of Turkish people, because they were expecting to West, as Ambassador has mentioned, to act very quickly to make their position that they are siding with Turkish demands for democracy, that they prove it on the streets, how they stop the coup, the plotters by losing their lives or wandering themselves. But as I said, there is not much change in terms of the main contours of foreign policy, but you need to reset yourself as Turkey, being in this troubled region. You need to balance your relations all the time, but this depends on how the neighboring countries, the big and small ones, are acting. So it's very normal to diversify your relations as it's energy security wise you do it. This is the way I will explain it.
Thank you very much. So Colonel Richard Outzen is an expert in defense policies. So we usually don't see what's going on in Turkey when we are within this the warm environment. So how does it look from the Washington D.C. and in comparison to maybe other cases? I mean, what is the the direction of Turkey's defense policies?
Well, first off, I'd say there are no other cases to which this can really be compared. So get that part off the table. It is sui generis for sure. And let me also start by saying thank you to SETA for arranging this very, very important event on the one-year anniversary of what was a really monumentally important event, not just for Turkey, but for the Friends of Turkey, and I think we all fall into that category here. I was new into my job at the Department of State, and I should point out that I had the Department of State's permission to be here, but I'm not speaking for the department. I'm speaking for myself as someone who has studied Turkish politics and security and the bilateral relationship for about 28 years now. I am both a military member, I'm a colonel in the U.S. Army, but I'm a military advisor at the Department of State in the Policy Planning Office, which means I have some ability to see both the state and the defense perspective on what happened. It was the case that I had just started this job when this happened I actually came on the 5th, and then on the 15th, of course, the coup attempt took place. And one thing I sometimes I do feel in this relationship between Turkey and the U.S. that there's a lot of what amounts to being a marriage counselor. It's to develop empathy for one another on both sides. And believe me, we do that when we explain Turkey and the United States. But we also have to explain a little bit about the American system and reactions to our friends in Turkey. And in this case, I think maybe a little bit more so even than the ambassador, I totally understand why we were slow to respond to that. Because the event that happened on the 15th of July, to understand that for an American, and remember, very few of us pay attention to international relations on a continuous basis. As a country, that's true. And even those of us that do typically don't just follow one country, we follow a region. I do much of the Middle East and some other countries outside of it. I do spend a lot of time thinking about Turkey, but even those of us who know about Turkey a little bit had a hard time following all the dynamics that led up to this. It requires, first of all, that you understand the struggle between the AKP and its former allies in the Gülen movement, and how that played out in the courts and the judiciary, in business, and military and other places. It requires that you understand the factional struggle that evolved within the Turkish military and other security forces over a 40-year period. It requires that you understand a little bit about the dynamics of the Syrian war and how that affected both governments, the United States government and the Syrian government, and how bad and how tense the relations got between the two by the time that we were in last summer's atmosphere. And it requires an understanding of the opaque linkages in this, what's been described earlier as a mafia-like cult, the Gülen movement. So just on the Gülen movement, let me say this for Americans here who have had some experience with the Gülen movement, and there are many because they had very active outreach, and for all I know still do. They had trips that they sponsored for people to travel. They, for many years, did supportive work for what Turkish diplomacy writ large was trying to do by introducing people to Turkish culture and folklore and things like this. This is a very benign face of that organization. Now, if you believe that it's a multi-level organization that has a social component, a business component, and then it gets up into smaller components that maybe even everybody in the organization doesn't know about, which is where I fall on this issue, I think there's probably people that are part of the organization that did not know what was going on in the security portions of it for military intelligence and judiciary and so forth. So if even people who have followed this struggle between the Gülen movement or FETÖ and the Turkish government, and before the Turkish government, the military, then how much harder is it for Americans who don't follow this to understand that, especially when the face that they have seen of that organization is a fairly benign one. So you'd have to have understood all of those things to have reacted in time. And first of all, I'll be the first to admit this, in the months before the coup attempt, there were some newspaper articles starting to come out where people in the U.S. were saying, well, the Turkish military is unhappy, there's going to be a coup, there might be a coup. I was one of those who said it's impossible. And I'll stick by that. By the way, I like Hakan Hoca's explanation that this was not necessarily a military coup, this was a civilian coup that was played out within the military. Because frankly, I did not think it was possible that the military in the top-down, unitary way that Turkish military coups happened before, that just would not happen because civilian control of the military had been strengthened so much in the preceding decade. So if someone who follows Turkey a lot like me was still unable to predict something like this, I think you have to give us benefit of the doubt that the shock factor within the United States government and the public and the bewilderment factor were very high. I'm going to generalize here and say that in the ensuing year since the coup, there's still a lack of detailed understanding. Most of the sources, we talked a little bit about the documents from the Parliamentary Commission in Turkey that looked at this. A lot of the good research and journalism that's been done on getting beneath what actually happened that day, most of it's in Turkish. There have not been a lot of good, and I'm waiting for the book, sir. There have not been a lot of good pieces, in-depth pieces that explain the mechanics of the coup attempt. So frankly, most Americans are left with a choice of sort of three positions. And the three positions they take, the first one is, well, we don't like Erdogan, so probably he's behind it. The second is, this is way too complicated, so let's just stay distant from the problem, and probably that was the most dominant. And the third is, maybe we don't understand all of it, but clearly we understand a little bit of what happened and we need to re-engage. And that's, I think, the most important and the most promising line of thought and inquiry, and I hope that more people take that. For me, the two conclusions that stand out from the coup at the distance of a year is, first of all, understanding that to an unprecedented level, there was a factional war within the Turkish military for control of it. And even for those in the United States who are not willing to say that Fethullah Gülen himself knew and designed the entire thing, initiated it, pulled the trigger, as it were, they have to see the relationships between the faction that was at the center of this coup and that movement. And I think that should help to take some of the energy out of the suspicion that somehow this was really done and manufactured to be instrumentalized. I'm not saying that it hasn't been instrumentalized, and I am on the side of those who say that the quicker that the investigations and the punishments can be done and gotten past, and the quicker something like normal politics can return for Turkey, the better it will be for the bilateral relation. But it will help our views and our support to that process to come to that understanding, that it was a real factional war within the Turkish military. So one of the things I want to talk about as someone who has, over the course of nearly 30 years now, served on several occasions with the Turkish military, is to address the military and security aspects of what came after the coup. Because there were many, many voices in the U.S. who said, the Turkish military is finished, it's done, that it's crippled, it cannot be relied upon, it lost too many pilots, too many generals, you heard that early on in the special forces, it can't be a successful partner in the war on terror. Some of those allegations were made, and I think that the good news in the course of the last year has been that despite very real damage that was done to the Turkish military, and Yashar Pasha, of course, helped us understand that earlier, they have made great strides in restoring the combat capabilities and the institutional capabilities of the Turkish military. It's pretty amazing that just a little bit over after a month after the coup had been done, that there was this major operation of defensive neorealism and Euphrates Shield that requires a significant ability to project power and to work with allies. Now, it's not an uncontroversial operation in terms of how most Americans view it, but then again, most Americans don't understand Turkey's unique geopolitics. The fact that such a successful period in the counter-terror campaign in the southeast against PKK was carried out is also very impressive. But people know less about some of the other things that are going on, such as the fact that in the last 2 to 3 years, Turkey's defense industry has taken great strides as well. Turkey is producing its own military satellites now, its own unmanned aerial vehicles. The Turkish military, over the years I have been following it, has turned into truly a first world force with some very cutting-edge technologies. Now, in a sort of ironic sense, some of the outcomes of the coup and the reforms that followed the coup may continue to professionalize and make stronger. Some of the things that are happening in the military educational field, I think, will ultimately have a propitious, a very beneficial effect for the Turkish military. It's very painful for the 3 classes of military cadets, for instance, who were let go. It's an extremely painful process, and I'm sure not all of them would have been supporters of the coup. So, I mean, there are some painful and regrettable decisions and aspects of this that I think nobody would have wanted. And yet, when we look at it from the rationalization of the services and the subordination under civilian control, ultimately, Turkey's post-coup military and security services are going to look more like what the West wants them to look like. What we do in between now and then is really a function of how well we manage the relationship. And I just want to end with this. I served with the Turkish military in 3 very distinct periods of time. In 90 to 91, I was there when we are at the end of the Cold War period. I was an American artillery lieutenant serving in Erzurum, not too far from Bayburt, so I know at least where Bayburt is. In 2001 through 2003, I was in Ankara at the Office of Defense Cooperation, and then in 2009 and 2010, I served in Afghanistan as a liaison officer, irtibat subay, with the Turkish brigade that was in eastern Kabul, and for a month, I was actually made the chief of staff of that brigade when its colonel became ill. I had seen over the course of those 3 decades changes, and not always good changes. And I will tell you that by that last assignment, it was clear that there was something wrong with the culture within the Turkish military. And there were groups within that headquarters that clearly did not talk to other groups within that headquarters. And I'm not going to tell you that I could pick out who was a crypto-feto or not, but there was a sense that the formal chain of command was not everything that determined how the business was going to run. That was an illness within the body of the Turkish military. It was an illness that developed there because of this factional struggle within the government that was being played out within the army, and that matches what I saw. So many of my friends, and I think of a couple of very good special forces officers that I knew in the Turkish military who were denied promotion above a certain rank because they were very staunch secularists. They refused, in English we would say, to kiss the ring of the people who were the informal powers there. So look, the politics of this are complicated. And I'm not, luckily, here to make political commentary, but as a military commentator, what I will tell you is that I'm very encouraged by how the Turkish military has adapted since the coup, and even more so how the Turkish and the public and the government of Turkey have not tried to collapse this military or reform it, as, for instance, the Iranians did after their revolution in 78, 79, and replace it with some sort of a revolutionary guard. The Turkish people and the Turkish government still love and trust their military and security services. They want them to be closer under civilian control, I think, to what the modern model should be. And I think the rest is just growing pains. I'm confident and optimistic about where bilateral ties are going, and I'm confident and optimistic specifically about the military-to-military aspect of it. Because I think that what's happened over the last 5 years in Syria and what's happened in the last 5 years in Turkey's experience with this coup attempt and how it was incubating have been incredibly distorting and destructive to the bilateral relationship. So with a little bit of tolerance and patience with one another, I think this all gets better.
Thank you very much, Colonel Outzen. So, Murat, we have been experiencing changes in Turkey's political environment as well as security environment. So, we switched to government system from parliamentary system to presidential system. We are dealing with the fight against the PKK as well as the Euphrates Shield. And also there's a immense restructuring within the Turkish military. So what's happening? Can you give a brief picture of the defense?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's a great honor to be here at SETA DC event on Turkish politics in the post-15 July military coup attempt. Your question is really difficult to explain in such a short time, of course, but I will try be very brief as much as possible. Of course, the post-15 July military coup attempt, Turkish politics is under a radical transformation, not only in terms of the changing dimensions and security policy of Turkey, but also we are going to, witness a kind of systemic change that I think will radically influence the decision-making process in foreign policy and security policy. And Turkey, of course, has been under, huge transformation since AK Party came to power in terms of the foreign policy discourse, the way in which how Turkey, involvement into the, wider crisis, wider region in the Middle East and the different crises and foreign policy issues. But I think we are going to see a huge difference when we compare to previous era, especially before the 15 July and before the systemic transformation in Turkey. But what I would like to talk about in my speech is that how we can or how we should understand, how we should explain Turkish foreign and security policy, especially in the post-15 July military coup attempt, by particularly focusing on the developments, on the security crisis, so to speak, in the Middle East. I have been working on Turkish foreign and security policy for 10 years. I worked at Ministry of Foreign Affairs and I work at the university. Now I'm working at the think tank organization, as well as I'm an advisor to Turkish military, especially the policy planning department in Chief of General Staff. And what I've been learning during this my experience that the ideology and the personality of the leaders are not too much important in shaping Turkish foreign policy. What I have been learned during my experience that conjectural developments and structural variables are very important in shaping Turkish foreign policy, especially Turkey's foreign policy towards the Middle East and Turkey-United States relations. So we are, I think, experiencing the same things that conjectural dimensions and the structural dimensions of the political and security development in the region, as well as within the domestic politics, are shaping Turkish foreign policy. So therefore, we really need to focus on what's happening in the Middle East, as well as what's happening in the domestic politics from the perspective of security challenges that Turkey has been facing since the Arab Spring. So therefore, I think there are three important dimensions that we can take into consideration in order to understand Turkish foreign policy and what Turkey's direction will look like in near future in terms of its involvement into the Middle Eastern crisis. So the first one, I think, is the regional geopolitical situation that is dramatically affecting Turkey's security and foreign policy perspective towards the different issues in the wider Middle East region. And the second one is the security challenges, domestic security challenges. Of course, we cannot separate the security issues of Turkey from the Middle Eastern security crisis, because there are mutually constitutive relationship between regional security crisis and Turkey's domestic security challenges. For example, PKK or YPG and PYD issue, I think, are mutually constitutive relationship in terms of undermining Turkey's national security architecture, especially since 2015. So therefore, we need to really carefully look at the security dynamics in the Middle East and domestic challenges of Turkey. So therefore, the relationship between regional geopolitics and the security challenges are really important to explain Turkish foreign policy and security policy. The third one, I think, is also important to understand how domestic political actors are reacting vis-a-vis the crisis emanating from Syrian civil war, Iraq, Turkey's struggle against Daesh. Is the domestic political concern is really important to see how Turkish foreign policy and foreign and security policy will look like in the near future. When we look at the regional geopolitics, of course, since the emergence of the new, so to speak, social movements in the Middle East after the Arab Spring, I think we have been experiencing radical challenges. There are, of course, many dimensions of these radical challenges, but I can, summarize by looking at 4 different dimensions of the radical security challenges. I think the first one is the, diminishing of the state sovereignty, so to speak. I'm talking about the failed state. When you look at the wider Middle East geography or the greater Middle East geography from, Libya, from Tunis to Yemen, there are many, different types of nation states that have been affecting a diminishing of the state sovereignty. So, but when you look at the Turkish security perspective, from Turkish security perspective, of course, Syria and Iraq are at the center of the declining of the state sovereignty, especially after the Arab Spring. The second one is the proliferation of the non-state military actors. Again, when we look at the greater Middle East geography from Yemen to the Libya, there are plenty of non-state military actors that cannot compare against each other. There are many religiously based fundamental non-state military actors, as well as there are secular non-state military actors such as YPG. But all these kinds of non-state actors are challenging, so to speak, Westphalian notion of state system, because they are challenging the sovereignty, they are challenging the borders, they are challenging the social cohesion of the nation state in the region. I think the third one is the tragic rise of terrorism and radicalization. This is, or if you like, violent extremism. All the states in the region are experiencing the violent extremism. Turkey is, of course, no exception in terms of experiencing, the religious based, radicalization and ethnic-based radicalization. Most, people from outside Turkey only focus on the religious radicalism, or if you like, in Turkey, by taking into consideration the rise of ISIS network in Turkey and so on and so forth. But when you look at the other cases, especially the PYD and PKK in Turkey, we should also talk about the rise of ethnic radicalization in the context of PKK. And this is not only in the discursive level that we are experiencing in Turkey in the context of the PKK. We are also facing an institutionalized rise of ethnic radicalization in Turkey that affect also social context of Turkish politics. The last one with regards to the regional politics that affect Turkey's security and foreign policy is the pressure on the border. When you look at the Iraq and Syria, for example, the Syrian civil war became a very complex. Syria is divided into 5 different sections or geographical zone, and many non-state actors are operating in this geography. When you look at the Iraq, there is also a border issue. So therefore, in this context, I think what are Turkey's priorities in the context of coming future with regards to Turkey's regional foreign and security policy? The first one is securing Turkey territorial integrity and the border security. I think this is one of the important dimensions that Turkey is going to act in accordance with the requirements of the territorial integrity and border security. We have been experiencing all the huge transformation in Turkey's border security as well. When we compare to the pre-Arab Spring period, we had a very liberal understanding of border security before the Arab uprising, but now we have a very securitized border security that we are constructing a wall alongside the Syrian border. I think this will make a huge impact on Turkey's foreign policy, especially vis-a-vis Syria and Iraq. And the third, I think, the second aim of Turkey is the increasing the number of countries that Turkey can work together, especially after the new government came to power. So finally, of course, in order to develop a comprehensive strategy for Turkish foreign policy, Turkey needs to work with, of course, its allies, but in order to develop new understanding in this context, we do not only a comprehensive strategy in dealing with the terrorism, especially against PKK and ISIS in the region, but we need also a common strategy that we can work together in defeating, international terrorism in the context of the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murat. So I think we have a little bit more than 15 minutes for the discussion. So I'll have a set of questions from the audience. So I'll be happy if you introduce also yourself. Mm-hmm.
University. Thank you very much for a very good panel, as good as the one in the morning. I wanted to ask Professor Guney a question about defensive realism. I mean, it makes sense, I think it makes sense to characterize to characterize Turkish foreign policy in those terms, not just after the coup, but since the sort of the return of authoritarian states in the Middle East, following the very mixed outcomes of the Arab uprisings. I mean, before the Arab uprisings went wrong, Turkey presented itself as a model for a secular Islamic democracy. That was far from being defensive and also realist. On the contrary, I mean, it was very idealist in terms of what it set for the region as a whole. And of course, the return of the authoritarian state made that not possible. And in fact, I would say, maybe the last speaker would disagree with me, that the fact that Turkish democracy itself is increasingly authoritarian reflects very much the influence that the region has on Turkey itself. I mean, I know no one wants to sort of make a connection between Turkey and the return of this authoritarian state, but at the same time, it seems to me that there's enough evidence to show that the influence between Turkey and the rest of the Middle East goes both ways and not necessarily in one direction. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take a couple more questions. You and you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a very specific question, and probably this would be in the first instance in the category, in the area of Ambassador Jeffrey, but others may have a comment too, and that is, why hasn't the U.S. extradited Fethullah Gülen? This seems to be a very peculiar issue because President Erdogan has insisted repeatedly, as have other representatives of the government, that the evidence that has been sent to the FBI and the Justice Department is absolutely solid, showing the grounds for extradition, and yet the American authorities have said repeatedly that the evidence is not convincing at all. So in the center, there's quite a mystery here.
So I will also get questions in the second round from this section, so please.
My name is Arman. I'm a student. I had a question particularly directed at Ambassador James Jeffrey and Colonel Richard Outzen. It seems that we have a situation where we have to work with some actors on the ground in Syria, which is complicating our relationship with Turkey. But ultimately, the situation in Syria doesn't seem like an existential threat to us. So is it really worth it to pursue these relationships if we risk our relationship with a major NATO ally that particularly might be useful right now with our issue with Russia and Iran coming up? And if so, if you think that is important, then what are the steps we can take to move towards rebuilding this relationship and putting it back on the right footing? Thank you.
So I have a question about the importance of the events in Iraq for Turkish security, and specifically on the upcoming Kurdish referendum in September for independence. Some experts have argued that a Kurdish state in northern Iraq might be accepted by Turkey because it would serve as a buffer against not just the rise of Shiism in Iran, but also against spillover effects of radical Sunnis to Turkey. Would any of you agree with that argument? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to come there. So let's give 1 minute to each speakers.
Okay, maybe I can comment back to the ladies, professors. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. About the situation of Turkey, why it has returned to stick to defensive realism. If I'm not wrong, you have said that it was because of the return of authoritarian state system to the region. Which is true in a certain extent, but this has also needs explanation, as it's been at the beginning of the Arab Spring in most of the written articles and books. Turkey has been pointed out as a model because it was successfully combined Islam with democracy. So it was a functioning state, exceptionally one in the Middle East. And so the way it was standing, its position was quite different. But the outbreak of Arab Spring brought up the hope of ours, including mine, that things were changing. You know, some of the theorists called this fourth way of democratization, and it was seen that all of a sudden, finally, people's demands for better living, democracy, and other things were going to be fulfilled. But on the contrary, we have seen that after the counter-revolutions that was supported by previous states, we have seen that some military tutelage systems has turned back, as along with the authoritarian ones. months. Whereas we have witnessed the civil wars on other parts of the MENA region, like in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and this has brought us the fractured state system of the MENA region, which breed this radicalism and terrorism. And Turkey, at the beginning of the outbreak of Arab Spring, actually stood at the right place in a historical moment, because it was thought that it could be somehow the old order of the Middle East was kind of breaking up, and it thought that with the peoples of wills, meaning the Arab states, when Turkey has sided with the people's wills for democratic rights and a better living condition, she thought a new regional order would come out, and this has not been realized. So this was the dilemma that we have faced, and since this region somehow is due to external interventions most of the historical times, and as well as no regional actor is most powerful than others, and as well as there is no regional comprehensive security architecture or a system that could stabilize the crisis, and this is where we ended up. So nobody is today talking about people's demands, about democracy. We're talking about where we are here, about the radicalism. We are talking about ISIS, Daesh, and tomorrow, if we won't go to the dealing with the source of the conflicts that brought us here as an international community, we would be just winding off the flames of ISIS in Iraq or Syria elsewhere, but we might be facing with this radicalism later on. Thank you so much.
Ambassador.
Sure. Start with the most difficult, the Gulen extradition. First of all, and I'm getting into legal territory here as well as government policy territory where my knowledge base is weak, but from what I've seen of this, first of all, Gulen has taken the U.S. government to court several times on cases including his claim to be a permanent resident that I would have thought would have been easy to beat down, but his lawyers were very effective beating the U.S. government. The Department of Justice does not like to lose cases, period. And they have a history of losing them with him. They're going to be very, very careful. Now, in terms of the specifics, an extradition treaty does not require the same beyond a shadow of a doubt determination by an independent judge, by a magistrate, that you have in a normal court case. But there are some special complications to this. First of all, if the defendant, in this case Gulen, can raise questions about the independence of the judicial system in Turkey, and look, my Turkish friends, much as I love the country, there are a lot of questions that can be raised. That is not a hard argument to make in an American court in 2017. Then the way to trump that, so to speak, is to show that there was an attack on the head of state. Now, that would also seem to be an easy case to make, but that's going to get into fairly specific questions of, did Fethullah Gulen know about the attempt? Was there an actual decision to kill the chief of state, and did Erdogan know about it? That gets into very complicated stuff that I haven't seen the proof, but I would be surprised if there's a whole lot of proof, because if you're going to do something like that, you typically don't leave a paper trail. Okay, second, since 1945, other than the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States has not engaged in an existential conflict, and I include 9/11. Why? Because we learned from World War I and World War II that if you wait until you have an existential threat, it may be too late. So therefore, we defend forward in non-existential situations. This requires balancing them. I, too, would weigh maintaining our alliance system, beginning with Turkey, which is so important to us, and focusing on the bigger danger, on Iran, enabled by Russia in the Middle East, rather than Daesh. The problem is, all politics is local. The American public is, ever since 9/11, mesmerized by the threat of terror. As Barack Obama at one point said, more people die in their bathtubs than die from terrorist attacks in America. But he was the guy in November 2015 that decided he really had to up the pressure on Daesh for political reasons. But the reality is, Daesh is going to be gone. It's not going to be a threat as a state to anybody within weeks, if not months. Then we're going to be faced with this awful situation in Syria and Iraq, with the threat from Russia and Iran, and don't think that this agreement in Hamburg went very far towards solving that. And we're going to have to rely on Turkey, rely on Jordan, rely on Israel, rely on our Gulf state allies, and rely on the people on the ground, some of whom fight with each other, Saudis and Qataris, Turks and the YPG, but we're going to have to sort this all out. I'm optimistic. In terms of the Kurdistan Regional Government, Turkey, for very good reasons, like the United States, is opposed to independence. We do not want to break up Iraq. Iraq is even more important. Look at its oil reserves, 2/3 of Saudi Arabia's, than Syria is. So the Turkish position, not just from its domestic standpoint, but from its regional standpoint, and even its economic future, as a trading partner and a transit through Iraq. Iraq as a united country is really important for Turkey. So the Turkish position is understandable and is correct. One caveat. If we all screw up and much of Iraq falls under the control of Iran, the way Lebanon has, on the margins, this might be revisited, not just by Turkey, but by Washington. I don't think there'll ever be an acknowledgement of an independent sovereign state of Kurdistan, but I think there might be different arrangements if that very negative situation arose. But Turkey and America have a joint interest in seeing that it doesn't arise, so let's wait this one out.
Sure. Largely associate myself with the ambassador's remarks. On the issue of existential threats, we were so not threatened in an existential way by everything that we saw happening in the Syrian conflict that we actually hesitated a great deal, even when we thought we knew what should happen there, that Assad should go. We did very, very good job of avoiding a substantial and categorical commitment to make that happen. That's because, frankly, it's really complicated. As a policy proposition, what should happen in Syria and all the different players in Syria is difficult and complicated. The only thing that got us to the point where we have forces on the ground was the emergence of an almost ridiculously evil group. When they started cutting off heads, Daesh sort of tied our hands on this one, because the American people are very hard to unify behind foreign policy propositions. But if you give us a very black and white situation, then typically we can unify behind that. And this was a unifying thing. The Islamic, so-called Islamic State, Daesh, was so in need of punishment and destruction that was enough to make many, many people who didn't really want us to get involved. Now, as the ambassador pointed out, that period, the period in which they actually had a physical caliphate on the ground, is coming to a close. So what we do now is incredibly important. And I think that as Syria is the biggest single obstacle, and what we've done there on both sides, to a good, healthy U.S.-Turkey relationship, especially in that region, that's where we really need to look to start improving it. And I think a solution in Syria, or an approach to it, in which we do not allow outright victory of Assad and his forces, which would lead to more civilian deaths in places like Idlib and the other places where there are oppositionists, that would lead to another round of refugees, that would lead to an acceleration of Iranian control. So something that builds on the current zones, reinforces it, and arranges for a long-term transition of power, that's both good for Turkey and very good for the U.S. So I think that's where the locus of conversation should be on that. And the point I would make about the KRG, were it to become independent as a buffer against Iranian hegemony, I think the strongest buffer against Iranian hegemony is a strong Iraqi state. There are Iraqi nationalists and people who do not want to be a satellite of Tehran. I think Abadi is a great example of that, and I think that a strong unitary Iraqi state with proper respect and support for the region, such as the Kurdistan region, is a far better break against Iranian influence than would be separate statelets.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I agree with Richard's thought about the Turkey's position and the role of the Iraq's territorial integrity and political unity in deterring the Iranian geopolitical expansionism in Middle East. From the perspective of Turkey, I think AK Party did a great job in terms of desecuritizing northern Iraq. Northern Iraq is framed as a part of a geographical zone in Iraq, in Turkish foreign policy discourse, but there is no problem in framing Iraqi Kurdistan in the region. So therefore, Turkey has a good relationship with the QRG, and Turkey is supporting the territorial unity, territorial integrity and political unity of Iraqi state. But I think there are three options that will affect Turkey's perspective towards the independence or a referendum of Iraqi Kurdistan. The first one, all these things depends on what kind of Iraqi state in near future that we are going to see. For example, if the QRG will, unilaterally declare their independence, this is going to be a problem for Turkey as well as other regional countries, especially Iran and other, Iraq and, of course, the United States. So, therefore, I do not think that they will take this kind of steps. Unilateral independence, declaring unilateral independence. So, the second one, the possibility of Iraq will turn a kind of failed state in the near future. It will, make a big impact of the Iraqi future in terms of the KRG's independence. The third option, I think, is much more important than they can negotiate with the central Baghdad government. And I think this will take also time for KRG and Iraq as well.
Mm-hmm. We'll take a couple more questions, so please.
Hello, my name is Nana Sajai. I'm from the Voice of America. My question would be about the human rights situation in Turkey. Everyone from Council of Europe to Freedom House to Amnesty International, every single watchdog has raised its concerns regarding human rights in Turkey, especially when it comes to media freedoms. And Turkey is top jailer of journalists in the world. And speaking of Amnesty International, the country director was arrested 4 days ago. With all these issues that have been raised regarding human rights and media freedoms in Turkey, the question is the United States turning a blind eye on human rights issues because Turkey is a big partner in that very turbulent region? Thank you.
Okay, just Murat or...
I think you say.
Just one quick response on that, because I do see the talking points that go in for all of our senior State Department officials before meetings with Turkish counterparts, as well as some of what we say in Turkey through our ambassador and the public messaging of the United States government. We have been very unequivocal in our belief and our encouragement to our Turkish allies that the quicker they can get to a full restoral of what we would consider sort of the normal human rights and freedom of the press environment, the better it is for both parties. So without going into too much detail about what's said in any one conversation, I can tell you that it is a part of every senior level conversation that we have. So the United States has not in any sense pushed that to the side and said, let's talk about that later. It's a part of the very important conversations we have. We have important conversations about common threats, about security, about cooperation, economy. This is always near the top of the list because it is something that's of great concern to us.
All right, so I would like to thank for the panelists and the audience for this discussion. I think it was very fruitful, but it seems that many of the questions still stand there, so we will continue to discuss. Thank you very much.